When you start romanticizing something that God has delivered you from because you don't yet have the promise, and you start romanticizing a relationship that you've outgrown or that was abusive or that has served its time, you can know that you're in the wilderness and your anxieties are kicking in. And you got to let your faith speak to those existential fears.
To the Spirit in Mind broadcast with your hosts, Bishop C. Guy Robinson and Dr. Jonathan Shepherd, where we explore faith and mental health perspectives on current affairs. Let's get into today's discussion with the Spirit in Mind.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Spirit in Mind, where we discuss current affairs with faith and mental health perspectives. I'm Bishop Guy Robinson, and I am glad to be with you for a new season of Spirit in Mind, and grateful for the presence of my colleague and co-host, Dr. Jonathan Shepherd. Hello, Dr. Shepherd.
Hey, Bishop. How are you, sir?
Good. With Spirit in Mind family, we're all back together again, and we're grateful for your support. Let someone know that we're on. In fact, let's do a little bit of our contact information, and we got some updates. Dr. Shepherd's got some updates going on with him professionally and personally. He'll share.
I am now currently, Bishop, a new transition has occurred in my life. I'm now the Chief Clinical Officer for the Department of Behavioral Health for all of the District of Columbia. And I am proud to be in that role. Just ended week number 3, and so happy that the transition is going well. It is an awesome responsibility, one that I cherish, and just thankful that I'm able to work in that position. So you can still reach out to me for direct care services. I can now take care of you both in DC and Maryland. Isn't that something? And it's awesome how in transition your borders will expand. And so just happy to do that. And Bishop, I don't know, should we tell the people how to contact us on our social media page?
Yes, absolutely.
Absolutely. So continue to reach out to us. Bishop C. Guy Robinson, as he's a pastor of the Tabernacle Church over there on the West Side Missionary Baptist Church. You can reach out to him on his various social media pages, CGR Ministries. You can check out his books on Amazon, Critical Collaboration. I know he's also busy with other books that he's writing. And he's also a teacher. And in case you go over to Morgan State, you might want to pop into his class. And so you can catch up with all those different avenues. Myself, you can always reach me at Dr. Jonathan Shepherd or at drjonathanshepherd.com. My website is back up and functioning, drjonathanshepherd.com. And that way you can reach out to me, and we'll make sure that you get the information for direct care services in Maryland and DC, Bishop. I'm actually able to say that. And so happy that you all joined us today.
Yes, indeed. And we just want to pause right there, Dr. Shepherd, to just say congratulations officially from the Spirit in Mind family on this season of promotion and moving forward in your professional endeavors. We're excited with you, for you. And listen to our Spirit in Mind family. Feel free. Some of the persons have already begun to put that in the chat line. Congratulations, Dr. Shepherd, leading the Department of Behavioral Health for the District of Columbia in the nation's capital. Wow. What a powerful opportunity, and I know you will be a blessing and have already begun to be a blessing to them. And shout out to Morgan State University. I'm so honored to be sharing there and courses in critical thinking and all that kind of thing. And so, listen, we're looking forward to today's discussion. So speaking of this, Dr. Shepherd has mentioned a couple times that he's going through some transitions in professional endeavors, and the seasons are changing. And Ecclesiastes 3 says, to everything there is a season. To everything there is a season. A time for every purpose under heaven. The Greek philosopher Heraclitus said, change is the only constant, is what Heraclitus said. And that's a philosophical view. We'll get to a little more of Jesus the same yesterday, today, and forevermore in a minute. But, we're being philosophical, theological, and psychological. The hymn writer, Jenny Wilson, said that time is filled with swift transition. Again, we seem to have the constant reality that we're dealing with change in this life. Again, the hymn writer said, time is filled with swift transition. The Bible writer, inspired writer of Ecclesiastes 3 said, to everything, not to some things, but to everything, there is a season, a time for every purpose under heaven. Everything under heaven, including you and me, have a purpose and a time within which we are to be stewards of that purpose. And to everything, there is a season. And so that's what we want to talk about a little bit. Today's episode of Spirit and Mind, we want to talk about embracing seasons of transition, successfully embracing seasons of transition. If any of you are going through any changes, changes are different. It's the time to go back to school. Life has a way, we can talk about that, but life has a way of preparing us for the transitions that are ahead of us. That's the spirituality of transition. God prepares us oftentimes consciously and unconsciously. Sometimes it's not until we look back in hindsight and realize that, wow, God was preparing me for the season of transition because, as the scriptures say, he knows the path that we take. And so we want to talk a little bit about seasons of transition.
Transition is in the air. So many things are happening. And we're going to stay with this topic, I'm sure, for consecutive weeks, transformations and transitions. And Bishop, as I was thinking about transitions, of course, I'm looking at my own life, and I have no problem with being vulnerable as I share, because transition is happening in my life. It is happening in so many of you all's lives out there. And one of the things I looked at is when you're in the middle of transition, is many times it's a transformation. It's a transformation period. And as you go through that, you are literally leaving behind one state to enter into another. And that's why it may at times feel like part of you is coming to an end. Mm-hmm. When you go through that transition, it's almost as if you're grieving. That's just like almost. Sometimes you are grieving because as you are recognizing that one stage of life is over, or one stage of whatever that activity is or event, it's now done. And now you must move forward into another season, another state. And that's why it feels like part of you is coming to an end. And it's what I consider a reconstruction of your inner world, of who you are. And what happens is that you start to shed many layers of what was. And now you become to be revived, renewed, and regenerated. And I can even hear my pastor, she will sometimes tell me, Shepherd, I can just see the layers just coming off of you as you are evolving into what you are called to be, or who God called for you to be. And that is so awesome, that those layers are being peeled back from you. Those layers are coming off of you. And that's what happens when there is transition. Bishop, there's an illustration that I'm going to toss it back to you. But a few months ago, I was just reading and praying and studying, and a caterpillar came to mind. And I thought about what happens when a caterpillar is in a cocoon. And I was really thinking about, what happens if the cocoon or the caterpillar stays in the cocoon too long? So I started looking about that and started looking at what happens when a person transitions and when an animal transitions, such as a caterpillar, and that shedding of the old self or that old layer as they become something new. A caterpillar comes from a animal that crawls along the ground and then can transform into a butterfly that now flies and able to move much further and even higher up. And so I thought about what that happens as you shed. You shed your old self, you're shedding your old defaults, you're shedding your old pattern, tendencies, and even Bishop, I was talking about how there is a fear of breaking out of the cocoon that has surrounded you while you develop. And as I was thinking about that fear, again, the question came to my mind, like, is it possible to miss the window granted to break out of the cocoon? Is it possible to be overdeveloped versus underdeveloped in the transition process? So that's really what I was struggling with. And Bishop, I'd love to hear your response to that. One more thing here. So what I did is, of course, the scientists in me started looking at what happens with butterflies, and they stay in their cocoons for 5 to 21 days. And if they're in really harsh places like deserts, some of them will actually stay up in there for 3 years, waiting for rain and for good conditions. And so that told me that the environment needs to be ideal for them to come out, be able to feed on the plants and lay their eggs and be productive. And so I was like, man, I get it now. I have to stay in this cocoon sometimes until my environment is right for me to be able to thrive and not just survive. I'm leaving it right there, Bishop, because that really spoke to me.
Oh man, this is good stuff. And again, we invite you to get in on this conversation, but it's so fascinating that you use that biological example with caterpillars and butterflies. And some of you know, I used to have, I'm going way back about 25 years, but my undergraduate biology teacher said to me one time, the more you study biology, the more you can appreciate your theology, if you really have a theological lens. And here's the reason why. You just talked about that and the transitions that a caterpillar has to go through to become a butterfly. And it's sometimes referred to as metamorphosis.
Yes.
Metamorphosis comes from the Greek word metamorpho, which is the very word that is used in the Mount of Transfiguration. When Jesus is on the mountain and everything in him, and it says he was transfigured, it's literally meant he transitioned in his figure, and everything that was in him came out of him. Wow. And so, and that's what I want to say, is that sometimes God is getting us to a place because things have been embedded in us. And that's the difference between something being enveloped and something being developed. Wow. And normally we have gifts and abilities and skills and things that are genetically and spiritually enveloped in us. But in order for them to become manifest, we have to be developed, which means that at some point we have to all come out of our shells. And coming out of our shells means that things that have already been encoded in our spiritual and biological DNA are saying that it's time for this transition to happen. The challenge is, both theologically and psychologically, is that we are social beings and we form attachments. Wow. And we become attached to temporary things that are seasonal. That's human. That doesn't make us evil. It makes us human. We become attached to the life that we know. Even in biology, that you're attached to the shell you're in, and there's an umbilical cord that attaches us to our mothers physically, and so it is spiritually. That when it is time to come out of that shell, it can be detachment, and you said it can cause a grief. It can be, if you will, not everything we grieve. There's lots of bad things. We can be grieving things because it's just simply that season has ended, which is why we celebrate and cry at graduations. Because we're aware that we're moving forward, but we're also letting go. And so that attachment and detachment is very real. It's a very real part of our development. And so actually that's one of my suggestions is, number one, accept the reality of change. And as you know, you and I, Dr. Shepard, talk a lot about acceptance. Acceptance doesn't always mean agreement. There's a lot of deepness in acceptance. It just means I accept that it is what it is, that life is changing and I am changing. And I'm going through changes. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm happy as can be about it, but I accept that change is a part of this life. And so, and then acknowledge the grief. It would be my second suggestion for those that are writing down, saying, I am grieving, even as I'm celebrating. I'm aware that in order to move forward, I have to let go. And I'm leaving some stuff to embrace some stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very real part of my transition. I don't want to avoid it. I don't want to misplace that grief. I don't want to do it in unhealthy coping strategies. I want to acknowledge that, man, even as I'm moving forward, I'm going to miss some things about the season that I must leave or release when I'm transitioning from. So that's two. I'll get some more as we continue. But take us further.
Wow, Bishop, thank you. And remember, call into the show, 443-380-2803. I just also shared online. Let us know about your time of transition that you're going through right now. But I just want to encourage people, just piggybacking off of Bishop. I want to encourage people because Bishop, I really believe that people think that they sometimes miss their window of opportunity. And sometimes you do. But what I also understand, and hopefully you heard me when I was saying that, is that sometimes we didn't miss it. We just had to make sure, or God wants to make sure that the environment is right for us to come out. So many of us are impatient, and we're impatient. We're very anxious. We're even fearful or scared. And, even as I was thinking about how I transitioned into this new role, I had to wait for an appropriate amount of time. I couldn't just up and get into the role. God was preparing me. He was preparing me through the various different things and trials and sufferings that I had to go through. And I'll be honest with you, as I began to poke holes in that and I wasn't Kaku, but the cocoon. as I was poking holes in that, as I was getting ready to make the transition, others could see it, Bishop. It was amazing. And one thing about things is that people who are for you, they will celebrate you, but then there'll be some people who are watching you break out, and they get scared themselves because they don't know what's happening. They see you coming out. They see you emerging as a new person, as a new creature, as a new level of elevation. And so I just want to encourage people today that there will be a time as you go through the transition where you may scratch your head and say, man, did I miss that window of opportunity? Am I overdeveloped? Am I underdeveloped? I don't know why that just sticks so much with me, because so many people really believe that they have missed their mark. And I want to let you know today, you haven't missed it, because it's messing with your mind. And again, in spirit and mind, we want to make sure that we're being relevant to where people are at. And we want to make sure that we're being grounded in faith-based principles, grounded in the word of the Lord. And I want to speak to your mind to tell you the word of the Lord tells you, you have not missed the mark. We want to make sure, God wants to make sure that when you come out, that you're ready, that you're prepared, and that you're not just going to survive, but you're going to thrive there. And that is just so important. One of the things, Bishop, that as you said, how do you know when your transition is occurring? And that's how I knew for myself, is I began to feel uncomfortable and restless in that current season. My passions began to shift along with that. And so when you acknowledge it, when you make that acceptance, and even though Bishop said acceptance is not agreement, we have to accept that transitions are not easy and will make you feel uncomfortable. So if I want to put a 1A, that's what I want to say right there. That you're not going to feel good when you go through that transition. And so I want to let people know ways to how do you know that you're transitioning. There's an uncomfortability there. There's an uneasiness. There's a restlessness in that current season. And you'll find your actions beginning to shift, Bishop.
Yeah, because that's a step out of the comfort zone. Tabernacle knows. And again, if you're available, you need to tabernacle of the Lord. We're in the series of talking about leaving the comfort zone. The comfort zone is an area where we got everything mastered and we have a relative sense of control. And then it's out of the comfort zone. This when God says to Abram, leave everything you've ever known and go to a place that I will show you. It's out of the comfort zone. It's when God liberates Israel and they're not in Egypt anymore, but they're not in Canaan yet, and it's in this middle place. peace, working through, navigating through, in a better situation, moving towards a promise, but not yet in possession, out of the comfort zone. And that's what we're talking about even now at the tabernacle, because God matures us. We mature, period. We get pushed out of comfort zones. Just when you master everything at high school, boom, here comes graduation, and then you got to learn a new campus. You know what I mean? So, and you were a senior on one level, but now, ironically, you're promoted, but you're a freshman all over again.
Wow.
And so some of us are going through that right now. This is we're in our last couple of moments. We want to just acknowledge that, accept the reality of change, know that it sometimes pushes us out of our comfort zone, but on the other side of it is the growth zone. And so that's why it's the development. It's bringing out what is already in us. It's what Paul meant when he said to Timothy, I know what's in you. You know, it's in your natural DNA. It's in your spiritual DNA. It was in your grandmother. It was in your mother. He said, and it's also in you. Then I laid hands on you. And now what's happening is life is stirring up again because a season of transitioning is happening. Oh, my goodness. And so you're being prepared for the transition. That's a word for somebody today because we're being prepared for the transition. And in the midst of that, we got to work our faith. Sometimes we have to do some cognitive reframing. Yes. Because when things are changing, our anxieties kick in and we go right to worst case scenarios. Wow. You know, that's when Israel was liberated from Egypt, but they're not yet there. And in that out of that comfort zone, they start saying, man, at least we had cucumbers and onions and leeks back with Pharaoh. Yeah, but you've been promoted. Why would you want to go back to that? When you start romanticizing something that God has delivered you from because you don't yet have the promise, and you start romanticizing a relationship that you've outgrown or that was abusive or that has served its time, you can know that you're in the wilderness and your anxieties are kicking in. And you got to let your faith speak to those existential fears. Man, I can stay here for a minute, but we got 2 minutes and 30 seconds left, Dr. Shepard, and then we'll close out.
All right, Bishop, hand it over to me after that. That's hot to handle. I mean, literally from the comfort zone to the growth zone. Thank you all. You all are blowing up the lines on the comments. I appreciate it. Yes, Bishop, I tell you, we are preparing for the transition, and thank you. You just helped us to stop romanticizing about the issue and leave it alone, and let's move forward on what God has for us. Lord, thank you.
Yes, sir. Is that not the word of God? That's why I had to say, stand fast in the liberty wherewith Christ has set you free. Here it is. And be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage, because sometimes the first step out of the comfort zone is not a happy place. It's an anxiety triggering zone. And in our anxiety, so you're out of the comfort zone, even out of the oppressive place. Because sometimes we get comfortable in the oppression.
Absolutely.
I don't have time, but the trauma reactions: fight, flight, freeze, fawn. FAWN is when I just try to accommodate the uncomfortable situation. But he says, and then when you get out of that, the first step is not usually Canaan. The first step is usually a wilderness, where now I got to face my fears and learn and let these other things that are in me develop. And I'm going to stop here because it's already in you. Everything you need to get to the growth zone, everything you need to experience post-traumatic growth is already in you. And so he that hath begun a good work in you, may he continue to perform it. Listen, that's all we have time for on Spirit and Mind today. But if you were blessed today, please let someone know. Dr. Jonathan Shepard, Bishop Guy Robinson, and the whole Spirit and Mind team, Praise 106. We're so grateful you're with us. And tell somebody we are back. And by the grace of God, we look forward to seeing you next time on Spirit and Mind.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. We're on Facebook at Spirit in Mind, and we're also on Instagram at Spirit in Mind Live. Join us next time for a new episode of Spirit in Mind.